Welcome to Soul Seeker. I'm Sam Kabert, and I'll be your guide on this journey. I started the show back in 2019, chasing answers like many of us do. But what I've come to understand is this: it's not the seeking that fulfills us. It's what we find in the quiet stillness beneath the search. When we stop chasing and learn to be with what is, we access a deeper wisdom. One that leads not to more doing, but to ease, grace, joy, and true fulfillment. My mission with this podcast is to help high performers just like yourself to regulate your nervous system, reprogram subconscious patterns, and embody emotional freedom so you can lead with clarity, resilience, and alignment. Welcome to Soul Seeker. Let's grow. What up, fam? Welcome back to another episode of the Soul Seeker podcast. I am your host, as always, Sam Kabert. And in this episode, I'm sitting down with one of my mentors, an incredible woman. Her name is Gabrielle, also goes by Gab Bosché. And she's been a mentor and a coach of mine now in this year of 2025. I mean, I've worked with her in terms of mentorship from afar, if you will. You know, we all have those people that we kind of admire, relate to, and we look to their content from the sidelines. This year, I said yes to working with her and her husband, Brian Bosche, and they're both incredible. Gab personally has shared the stage. She is a public speaker. She's shared the stage with Malcolm Gladwell, John Maxwell, Dave Ramsey, and even Rudy Giuliani. She's worked with so many companies from Google, the CIA, y'all, the Navy, and so many other companies. She's incredible. Her and her partner, Brian, have been approaching how can we better understand our own purpose from a grounded perspective for the past 10 plus years. They've really built this incredible system to understanding why you're here, what you're meant to do, and that goes with your natural abilities, your skill sets, all of these different types of things. So in this conversation, what we're really talking about is how did Gab come to this work of being so passionate about purpose and what it has been like for her to be in her early 20s and be a public speaker through as a woman, you know, and what that looked like in the Me Too movement, how that actually did more harm than good, and so many different topics. One of my favorite quotes from Gab in this episode is, "Be curious, not critical." I think in my work and a lot of the stuff that you guys are interested in terms of mindset work and nervous system regulation, you know, when I talk about triggers or different things coming up or recognizing old outdated patterns of limiting beliefs, so often we go straight to shame and guilting ourselves. But instead of shaming and guilting ourselves, if we recognize that shame and guilt, we can choose to celebrate that because we just built moment-to-moment awareness, which means we can respond versus react. So with her quote of curious, not critical, I think that really applies in these moments when we do that self-reflection. We can be curious about what's coming up as opposed to self-criticizing ourselves. So enjoyed this episode with Gab. I know you guys are going to get so much out of it, but before we get the show started, I just want to remind you that if you are new to the show, or if you haven't already left the Soul Seeker podcast a 5-star rating and review, literally the best, the easiest way to give back to the show is simply by taking a minute of your time, going to either iTunes or Spotify and leaving the show a 5-star review. You know, I do this podcast because it's really my mission to help raise the consciousness of humanity from this fallen state. So if you're down with that mission, the easiest way to give back to the show is just leave a 5-star rating and review. And if you want to go deeper with me and really learn more about breathwork, nervous system regulation, how to overcome limiting beliefs at the root, I invite you to join our free, yes, I said free, Breath Club community. You can find that link in the show notes as well as all the other links to connect with Gab. Thank you so much and enjoy this episode with Gab Bosché. What is up, and welcome back to another episode of the Soul Seeker podcast. We are on episode number 289, inching ever closer to 300 episodes. So stoked about that. In this episode, we're going to talk about purpose. We're going to talk about all kinds of things, but we're going to do what we always do here at the Soul Seeker Show. We're going to ground in with some breath. So Gab, for yourself, for me, for all of you out there in listening land, as long as you're in a space where you can close your eyes, not driving your car, not going on a run, those type of things, you can always breathe with us. But if you are able to slow down and take this pause, I invite you to take a seat. Gab, for you, for me, and for all of you listening that can, we'll begin to shut down the eyes and just sitting straight up, feeling your feet on the floor. And through the nose, inhaling all the way up. Sipping in a bit more air at the top. And a big sigh, let it go. Another inhale up. Inhaling, letting the belly and the back body expand and bringing that breath all the way up. Sipping in a bit more air at the top. Hold the breath, rolling up the eyes. And sighing out, let it go, let it go, let it go. And one last one, inhaling all the way up till you can't get any more breath, and then just sipping in a bit more at the top. Hold the breath, roll up the eyes, relax the jaw. And sigh out. And here we are. Here we are. Gab, welcome to the Soul Seeker podcast. Stoked to have you here.
My friend, I am so honored to be a part of here. And thank you so much for exposing your community to our amazing message on purpose. And I am so excited about hanging out. This conversation is going to be so good.
Yeah, it's been amazing to learn from you over the past couple of years. You know, I was on the sidelines for a long time, just seeing your webinars and your trainings in terms of how to really articulate your message and reach a wider audience from the stage and as a coach, consultant, all the things. And I recently had the opportunity to drop in with you and your partner, Brian, in both Dallas and Alabama, and stoked to be here now. But for those of our listeners that may not be familiar with your story, could you tell us a little bit how you went from what life was like in college, what you thought you wanted out of life, and then how you made that transition into speaking?
Yeah, well, I'm one of the many on this journey who I was not really planning on going to college. I'm one of the first in my family to go to college, get a higher education. And so when I did finally go to college, I was like, what in the world do I choose? Because it seems like this really epic question of like, what area do I study? And so I studied the two things you're not supposed to talk about in polite conversation, which is politics and religion. So I really doubled up on those two topic areas. And like most people, when I went to college, I wanted to change the world. And so I was like, if I study two things that people are really passionate about, two means that most people use to try to make the world a better place, will I finally get there? And so after many years of working in and out of the government, working in and out of politics, working in and out of religious organizations, nonprofit organizations, you name it, I tried it, just trying to change the world. And then I finally came to this key component, which is what we speak so much about now, which is what is my purpose? What is the best of what I have to help other people? Not the job that I do for other people, not the role that I play in my relationships, not what I necessarily even get paid for, is what is the best of what I have? What is the thing that I'm ultimately going to be able to contribute to the world? And so walking through that process, and I'm a nerd, and so anytime someone gives me advice, I like challenging it and kind of going a couple different levels deep. The 7 levels of why is a really powerful practice that I've used to be able to kind of get to the foundation of why is something truly important to me. And so when you ask 7 levels deep, why 7 levels deep, you can really start to see, what do I really care about? And for me, it was this concept of helping every single person on the planet, no matter who you are, where you come from, where you're going, helping them understand why they're here and what they're supposed to do about it. So it went on this journey of someone just giving me advice, you should find your purpose. And I was trying to figure out what in the heck I was doing in my 20s. And then that turned into a lifelong journey of applying the scientific method to something that many people think is either esoteric or too confusing or too inconvenient, which is this concept of purpose that you and I are so passionate about.
Yeah, I know you and Brian did a lot of research and studying and all the things to get to where you're at now in terms of your purpose assessment quiz, and then also training people in purpose in large organizations at scale. I think you're doing one organization with like 16,000 employees. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Walking them through finding out what their purpose is and how they get to use it every day at work. Because I think so many times people just assume I have a purpose. Maybe it's the role that I play in my family. Maybe it's the hobby that I do. Maybe it's the philanthropy that I help support. And then we turn off and kind of walk in almost like in a severance kind of way, walk into work and assume I no longer have a purpose. And so helping people create that enlightenment, that the people that they're working with, the vendors that they're hiring, the connections that they're making with the clients that they're serving, those are all people that they can serve with their purpose.
Now, tell us a little bit more about the scientific method. Like, how'd you come to create this and do all this research? What did that look like?
Yeah, so it really just came down to what is a cornerstone of truth that we could apply to discover something that would have a universal application. So the scientific method, for all of us who remember from like 7th and 8th grade, was the process of being able to test a hypothesis and kind of reverse engineer what could work. And so being able to take that kind of scientific method to purpose, to say, hey, I have a hypothesis of what purpose is, let me test it. So that was kind of the first phase. It was like, I think that purpose is more than just a reason for being. I think it probably has something to do with what you do for other people. So that was our hypothesis that we started off. Then we started to test it. So we started to look at things that were really ancient. What are the things that haven't really changed? What are the things that are true across religions and societies and time frames? And we started to really find that there were these 4 things in place that no matter whatever people were talking about purpose for long periods of time, these 4 things were in existence. It was always something natural, so something that you're born with, something learned, so something that you could actually get better at, something about passion and having some sort of like emotional element to it, and then something about overcoming hard things. So every time, whether we were looking at the Stoics or popular religions, when we were looking at poetry, when we were looking at just these core foundational truths, we're like, these 4 things tend to be here. And then we started to ask questions as can we then help people create categories around that? As humans, our brains are really funny, is we love labeling things. We love having certainty in places where uncertainty already exists. And so being able to give people labels to things. So under each of those 4 categories, we have 5 archetypes that give people language, understanding, and identity. So that way they can say, oh, I'm a builder. That's why I love starting things, handing them off, and moving on to something else. So helping people find awareness, because whenever you're developing an assessment, it took us about 10 years to develop the system. We tested it first on ourselves. That's always one of the first things that you should do is, first of all, does it work on me, right? We should always be N of 1 is what process am I wanting to teach other people? Can I use it on myself? Then we started using it on our friends, whether they liked it or not. We'd bribe them, have them come over to our house and have like dinner and wine. We'd say, hey, we think that this is going to work. Then we started selling it to individual coaching clients, and we started working it into training workshops that we were doing already. Then we started to scale it with a lot of these Fortune 50 companies and the U.S. military and many of these organizations. And so it started really small. On a plaque I've had in my office from high school says, do not despise the day of small beginnings. And that's been a mantra of mine from a very early ages. It doesn't look like a lot now, but it has to start somewhere. Everything has to start somewhere. So this epic cause we have of helping 1 billion people find their purpose, of course, it had to start off in our little tiny apartment in Washington, D.C., just trying to figure out this thing is, could we actually, through a scalable scientific method, help someone find their purpose in a way that was helpful, directional, and gave them confidence about what to do next?
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible, because I know with me, like I totally identify with like having that shiny object syndrome. And one of the things my dad ingrained in me as he and my mom owning a business together and being entrepreneurs is like, too many people just plan. Like you gotta take action. So I'm almost on the extreme of like taking action and then figuring it out as I go along. But this is incredible, and this is incredible advice for so many of you listening, because I know a lot of you are going through career transitions and things like that. So everything that Gab just said is just a great playbook, and we'll probably get back to some of the purpose stuff. But I want to switch gears for a moment and talk about like what it's like to be a woman in the space of personal development, coaching, and speaking. I would love to hear what that's like.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I love the curiosity because I think that that's where such beautiful understanding comes from, is because each of us have our own unique perspectives and experiences based off of who we are and where we come from and how we're experiencing those things uniquely. And so I love that you asked that question, Sam, because honestly, I don't come into the room thinking I'm a female entrepreneur or, a woman CEO or any of those things. I didn't have like the lady boss, rise and grind in my heels kind of stage in my business. To me, the call of the entrepreneur was like, I didn't have a choice. If someone would have had a stable job and they would have paid me to do what I'm doing now, I would have taken it. And so there are different types of entrepreneurs. Some people are too rebellious to listen to advice from other people, so they feel like they have to start their own business. And then there's some of us who, if the alternative existed, I would have taken it. And so I think because of that, my identity really came from how can I make this work and how can I be really scrappy. But I started to learn really early on that being a woman and being an entrepreneur and being a woman entrepreneur in the personal development space meant I was having a very different experience. And so there were really key moments when those things started to happen. One of those moments happened for me when I showed up to a networking event that a friend of mine had put together. And I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, which I love D.C. It was one of my favorite places to live. But we call it the Hollywood for ugly people. And we call it that, or we call it nerd prom too. And like literally people just call it that because it's really funny. It's a lot of people who were like nerds like me, who were like class presidents and like people who weren't cool in high school or whatever, all coming together. So we like weren't really good at socializing in high school. So we get really good at socializing as like interns and in our 20s. And so they were putting on this networking event, and I'm like a fairly confident person and I could talk to a wall. Like I really enjoy learning about people. And I walked into this room and for whatever reason, my energy was off. I probably wasn't doing my breath work like he led us through. And I walked in and I was in such a beta mode. And it was really interesting. I had this moment and my friend pulled me aside and said, hey, is everything okay? You really don't seem like yourself. And what I realized is that I had gotten into this position where I had a belief structure that I was less than because I was a woman. Now, no one blatantly said that. I certainly wasn't even the only woman in the room, but I noticed that there was a talk track that I was coming into agreement with. And I started to do quite a bit of study around birth order, and understanding birth order really did help me understand. One of my favorite books is literally called The Birth Order Book, and it helped me understand that I'm the second born. I'm the baby of two women. We have a very like the genealogy of my family is just a lot of very, very strong women. But for some reason, I was having two identical experiences. One was, I was walking into this room and if you would have asked me, are you confident? Absolutely. But my body was not manifesting as confidence. And when that happens, we then create curiosity and become curious, not critical, when we're having these experiences to say, what's happening in my body? Why am I acting this way? And it was a belief system that whether subliminally or not, I'd come into agreement with, that I believed that people were going to treat me differently because I was a woman. Now, whether that was, family of origin stuff or things that I had seen or experienced, sometimes I think actually sociologically and just popular culture will tell us to be offended when we weren't. Nothing happened in that moment where I walked in that someone said, oh, that's the women's section, stand over there. No one looked me up and down and said, oh, you're a girl, we can't talk to you. There wasn't anything explicit, but I do believe that there was an implicit belief that I had that I was bringing to the table, because we actually treat people how to treat us. And so in that moment, it became the self-fulfilling prophecy that normally I'd walk into rooms and have no problem talking to whoever. But in that moment, I started to believe, I think they're looking at me differently because I'm a woman. Now, at the time, I was having a very interesting experience because I was also competing in beauty pageants. So I was like hair up to high heaven, lashes, heels, sparkles, very unlike how I am now. I'm kidding. Not a lot has changed. But what I learned in that moment is I had a belief system of, oh, people think that you're too pretty to be smart, or people aren't going to take you seriously. They're going to think you're, too smart to be pretty. People think, oh, you're just doing these beauty pageants. And truthfully, I'm an Enneagram 3. And so beauty pageants were great for me because I'm very competitive and I needed somewhere to put all of my energy. But it was interesting to see the interactions and how I actually started to create tension in these interactions that wasn't necessarily there because of a belief structure that wasn't true, but I was accepting it as truth.
Yeah, I love all this so much because this is the work that I'm into, nervous system regulation stacked with subconscious reprogramming. And to your point, like we can think that we're confident, right? But if we don't truly feel that in our subconscious and our unconscious, 95% of our awareness, and we don't feel that in our body, then to your point, it's not going to manifest that way. And curious, not critical. I'm going to highlight that for everyone listening because that's I've heard you say that, and I think now that we're having this one-on-one dialogue, it's landing differently, right? Because that's something I say a lot, not in that kind of way, but it's about building awareness. And a lot of times when we get to this realization of something, there's shame and guilt that comes there. And one of the things that I say is like, hey, if you notice the shame and guilt, then celebrate that because you just built awareness and now you can respond as opposed to subconsciously react. And that is what being curious in the shadow work is all about as opposed to critical. So that's dope. Really enjoy that. So fast forwarding a bit, like what's the climate now? Because I know you and I were talking when we were out there in Alabama, I like to say Bama, about women and things like that. I mean, the conference you guys did was incredible. It had some amazing speakers like Dave Ramsey. And one of the things I mentioned to you was like, there's 10 plus speakers or something, and they were all men. And, I'm a California guy, and you grew up in California as well. It was a different, it was very religious and a lot of men. And that's how we started this conversation about women. Could you speak to some of those things in terms of women, not the religious stuff?
Yeah, it's very interesting walking into the room and and being the only. And so everyone can have their own experience of what only means. And so in this instance, my only was, I'm the only woman. And I've been on the professional speaker circuit for over 15 years. So it's not unusual that I'm the only woman. For a very long time, that was kind of my niche market, was that I was the only woman and I was the only millennial at the time. That was actually a big part of my business is instead of looking at me being the only as something that I apologize for, I actually featured it. And so my company was called the Millennial Solution. I leaned into the fact that I was very feminine and that was something that I kind of learned almost as a coping mechanism when I was younger, is highlight the things. When you're bullied a lot as a kid, you have two choices: either hide the thing that you're bullied or feature it. And so I definitely featured it. I had 8 of my teeth pulled when I was in 8th grade. So you can imagine. So I just had 2 front teeth and like blackness on either side. And
like cavities, or what's that about?
No, I just had baby teeth. And I just my teeth hadn't fallen out. And so I just had this very epic adventure of being in middle school, going into high school, and just having really a janky smile. And I remember I have an amazing mom, and she just was like, she's like, don't close your mouth when you smile. Smile, laugh, everything is fine. And she just taught me to embrace the fact that I was just in a season and I just looked ridiculous. And so I just created such a beautiful sense of humor really around it. And so I just have learned to kind of like highlight the thing that I'm insecure about, because then it gets people on your side. Because sometimes we don't believe ourselves. So sometimes if you're like, I'm going to hype myself up and I'm not, I'm not less than, I'm not smart, I'm not whatever, invite people in to then also to crowd out the negative voices with their positive voices. And so I kind of leaned into that pretty early on. So I'm pretty used to being the only female, but it has been very interesting just over the years where I've gone in and out of different rooms where just a few months ago, I spoke at my first women's only event. I've been a professional speaker for a really long time. For me to, for the first time, go to an event, me speaking at a female entrepreneurship event, it was amazing. But I had some of those moments. I was like, that's so interesting. That was actually more triggering to me, going into a room full of all women, because I was like, I'm just not used to not being the only.
What part was triggering, would you say?
I think, having been so bullied for such a long time.
The sister wound.
Yes. Yeah. And it was really, but it was one of those things that, again, rather than hide from it, feature it. It was one of the first conversations I'd have with people where I'd say, hey, I'm so happy to be here, because I had a trigger around large groups of women for a very long time. And they just were so lovely and so kind. I think it's one of the most important things that you can do when you're paying attention to something that hurts and you're in a safe space, to be able to communicate your needs and communicate your feelings, and to have that kind of moment of connection and vulnerability. One of my core values is go first. And so if I ever see someone, if I want to have a relationship with you, I'm not gonna be like, oh man, I wish Sam would call me. I wish Sam would connect with me. Man, Sam's so cool. I want to be friends with Sam. I'm not gonna wait for you to like hopefully pick up on my energy I'm putting out there. I'm just gonna go first and be like, hey Sam, I think you're a really great person. Can we get together and connect? So I just will always go first whenever the situation arises. But the personal development space has changed so much for women, and I'm so excited about it, because what I've seen for many women in this space is it used to be shoulder pads. Women had to be in their masculine energy. We had to act really, really tough. Like one of my mentors, Tamara Lowe, she ran Get Motivated seminars, and like she had like the boxy suits, and like it was a different time. And then now we're seeing so many speakers really leaning into their feminine, that they're leaning into the fact that that they love being girly and sparkly and whatever, and seeing the world embrace them for that. Now, in my ideal world, those women would be just as celebrated on stages where men are in the crowd as women. Right now, I'm seeing that there still is a divide that I think needs to change. I think that there still is that tension of coming in with women being in their feminine, and we need to unlearn, I think, some of the expectations of whether it's women on stage or women in podcasting or women writing books. For such a long time, women have been told only women should listen to you. And so many women who do have messages that need to be heard by both men and women are being put into a corner of only working with women. And so whenever I'm working with women, I always encourage them, what feels true to you? Is it just that you want to work with women because that's who you feel most called to? Or is it that you're working with women because you're afraid of the judgment and the rejection of male counterparts who maybe you don't feel worthy to be able to serve? And paying attention and answering those two questions is really important, especially if you're wanting to build a business. Helping people you're called to help, knowing who those people are, is so important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, I imagine with your work with purpose, like that really, in terms of like niching, I know it's not like per se a niche of yours, women, but I think that could really help a lot of women that are looking for their voice and how to share, how to like step into their most empowered self,
And I think what's so important, I totally agree with that. And women need men who are allies pulling us up. Because it's very different when I walk into a room for male leaders, especially of a certain generation. They're not used to working with people who look like me. I'm the secretary type. I'm the support staff. I'm the event planner. I'm not the one who's also taking the stage. And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about is empowering leaders of all ages with an understanding of we need all types. We need people to come in. They need my perspective to come in as a young woman to say, here's what my experience is like. Here's what it's looked like for me. And here's how you can help me. And then I need to tell them like, hey, and ask from them to tell me more about your experience. What has been your lived experience and how can I help you? We all need each other. But I think one of the things that I would really encourage, particularly your female listeners, is to not be afraid to find mentorship in people who are very different from you. Whatever that mindset that you have, it's very easy to have those false beliefs of, he's too old or he's too white or he's too established or he's too corporate, like those things, like the typical cookie cutter things that we think of as a generational hierarchical kind of like old school mentor, is to take away some of the mindsets that have hurt us. Because one of the things that I'm really passionate about is generational reconciliation, is being able to bring people together to say, you may come from a very different background, have very different mindsets, but what can we learn from each other? Because oftentimes they're just as scared to talk to you than you are to them. And so being able to have common ground and to help their wisdom transfer to the next generation. I meet so many people in their 60s, their 70s, their 80s who are just flush full of wisdom, but they don't know how to translate it to the next generation. What a beautiful thing if we could just put down our arms and say, hey, traditionally, I wouldn't have anything in common with you. You and your pinstripe suit, and you and your big corporate experience, and you and your very traditional upbringing. but instead going to them and say, I bet you know something that I don't know yet, and giving them permission to be able to mentor us, because I think it really does go both ways.
Yeah, that's, I'm not sure I'm familiar with that term, but I love it. Generational reconciliation. We'll talk more about that. I got more questions about that. But before we do, so you mentioned something about like the Me Too movement and how it actually made things more challenging. Could you speak to that? Hey, it's Sam. Can I share something real quick that I think might actually help you? If you've ever felt overwhelmed by your emotions, like you're doing all the right things, yet you still feel off, it's not because you're broken. You know, most of us were never taught how to feel in a way that actually helps us heal. That's why I create Breath Club, a free community where I guide weekly breathwork sessions to help you regulate your nervous system, process emotions, and return to clarity. We use something called the 90-second reset, a simple, science-backed practice that shows how fast emotions shift when you allow yourself to feel them fully. You'll get access to live calls, a community, and on-demand breathwork exercises to reset anytime. No pressure, just an invitation to feel safe in your body again. Links in the show notes if you want to join us.
Yeah, the Me Too movement, for all of its greatness, I think in many instances, my experience was it really hurt me. During the Me Too movement, which feels like yesterday and 10 years ago simultaneously.
I know, right?
During the Me Too movement, I had a really hard time because I saw how quickly men in positions of power started to treat me differently. They went from meeting with me one-on-one to work with me on my business. And these were business mentors of mine. These were spiritual mentors of mine. These were people who I'd known for many, many years. And so they went from meeting with me one-on-one to only meeting with me via Zoom to then not meeting with me at all. And I had an interesting case study because I have a business partner who's also to my husband, and they would meet with him one-on-one. They would return his phone calls. They would intentionally seek him out and give him advice. And so it started to see the distinction, the splintering of how men of a certain age really started to, because I didn't see it as much with men my age and men who were younger. I did start to see it with kind of older generational men who were very afraid of getting canceled. And so because of that, their fear of the perception of infidelity or anything just that whispered of something that was inappropriate, their fear of being found out caused them to sever a relationship that was beneficial for both of us. And as I started to see the negative impact on my business, I got really frustrated. And honestly, I was almost like mourning for a generation of women who I believe were not able to get ahead. I see it right now, even with many of my clients who are female clients in corporate, is the reality for us is very different than the reality for men. The old boys club is still very much alive and well. And so yes, I could stay up late and do the cigars and the wine and the playing golf and all of that. But there's just some realities that, at least in my experience, number one, I don't want to stay up that late. I'm tired. I have a very long face care routine that I got to get into. Like, I just can't physically do a lot of the things that men of that generation really enjoy doing. So part of it is just the hobby factor and the relatability factor. And it's human nature, right? We like people who are like us. That's just the tribalism. That's just how it is that we're kind of formed and created and how we've survived. But it comes to a certain point, and I really think that women need to be open and create conversation because it's on us. I think a lot of times when we see impropriety in other generations, we can say, well, something's wrong with them. And like, they just need to we just need to shut them off and like start all over. They still have so much to give. And honestly, some of it is just the unlearning. My mom's turning 80 this year, and the curiosity I've seen in this woman has been amazing. The connection, she went from living in a suburb in Northern California to living right now next to me in downtown Dallas, and her friend group has changed, her curiosity has changed. I mean, what she does on the weekends has totally changed because she's just made herself open and said, we come from such different perspectives. I want to learn from you. I want to create a relationship with you. I want to do life with you. And so I've just seen it so many times that there's there's so much more hope in that older generation than I was expecting. But I think it's a very real problem, and I think the Me Too movement was going to help us, but I think it's actually set women back in a very real way.
Yeah, it really seems that way in a lot of ways, the way you are describing it. And as I feel into it more, like, I guess the question that's coming up is like, what can we actually do about it? Like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one thing is for women, if you want to have a mentor who is a man, is to be, number one, aware that that their relationship with you may look and feel different, and just to be kind and to not be judgmental. I remember when I was first starting out, I got really frustrated the first time I started getting treated differently, and I just kind of threw my hands up in the air and I gave up. I was like, that's it. I'm not going to be mentored by any men. And then all of my mentors were kind of a monolith. They were all women. They were all like a certain corporate type, and that wasn't helpful to me either. So the number one thing is like to not get triggered when and if you start to kind of feel or project that you're feeling something based off of the experience that you're having. I think the second thing is getting in the room. Developing relationships can take time. And so that means going where those people are going. It means paying attention to and reading what it is that they're reading. There's different types of mentorship as well. There's direct mentorship where it's like, you and I might sit down and have, a mentoring relationship that way. Then there's mentorship by proximity, where I might just be sitting near you and watching what you're doing and observing how it is that you're doing things. I can learn that way. And then there's mentorship by inspiration and practice, like listening to your podcast, reading your books. So all of those are appropriate. So if I have a top mentor, and what I like to do is I have kind of a board of advisors. So I have a board of advisors for my marriage. I have a board of advisors for my own mentorship.
Chat.
What?
For chat?
For a board of advisors for...
You have Chat GPT as well.
Well, I do. Yes, you're right. Yes. Yeah.
Let's get to that moment. That would be good. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I have created a GPT that's all of my advisors now, that they give me advice. And so what I've done is I'm like, okay, who are my top people who I'd love to get mentored by? And then I will pay attention to what they're reading. I will follow them on social media. I more like stalk them. I call it stalking success. And I'll seek to put myself in rooms that they're going to be in, going to conferences, joining their masterminds, those types of things. So if you can get in the room, even better, to create that connection and to create that relationship. And then I think the third thing is just to call it out. If there's a situation where you feel like someone's treating you differently for being a woman or being an only, whatever that looks like for you, it's completely appropriate to respectfully identify what it is, so that way it can be brought to light and discussed. The more we apologize for other people's behavior, the more we pretend like it's not a thing, the more shame we create for ourselves, and the more bitterness we actually insert into a relationship, which if we address it appropriately and with kindness and honor, I actually think both parties would just benefit so much more if we're just honest when we say, hey, when you canceled the meeting last minute with me, but then decided to go out with my male colleague, this is how it made me felt. This is what it looks like. And I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. It's totally appropriate and kind to do so.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up in regard to apologizing, So this isn't just like a gender specific thing. We all do it. I think if we were to put what's the word I'm looking on? It's not cliche, but I'll roll with that. Cliche on it. It's typically more women that's, I'm sorry, right? But we all do it. And, to say I'm sorry is really robbing the other person and yourself, as opposed to saying something like, please forgive me, or reframing it another way. But what are your thoughts on that? To just go a little bit deeper on like this quick reaction of just like apologizing.
Yeah. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think whenever we are quick to apologize, it's usually us trying to escape being uncomfortable, not us actually demonstrating any sort of sorrow. And so oftentimes it's us taking on someone else's shame and saying, you know what, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't have rescheduled, or, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you. I mean, all of those kind of key things that socially, if someone's doing that, you wouldn't think twice, but identifying what is the source of the sorry. Because sorry comes from the word sorrow. So if you're looking at, is it actually producing some sort of deep it's us saying, I'm sorry, to get ourselves out of feeling uncomfortable or inconvenient or any of those things. So I really like that reframe of what other language can you use instead of saying, I'm sorry. I'm not one of those people who says, I'm sorry a lot. I've worked in environments where we actually had one of our colleagues, and I had an I'm sorry jar because she said sorry so many times that I had her put money in it every single time she apologized for something that wasn't hers to apologize for. So yes, I do think that women generally have that, because I think women generally have we feel the sense of emotional responsibility in a relationship. If you're uncomfortable, we're going to put it on us. We're going to say, what could I have done differently so that Sam wasn't upset with me? What could I have done differently so that way this relationship didn't end the way that it ended? What could I do differently so that the client didn't get mad at us? Those things, women tend to really take that responsibility, because in the tribe, that's kind of what we did, is we have that kind of mothering heart. We want to make sure everybody feels okay and does okay. But that can also too create a lot of unnecessary burdening of our souls, where we're actually taking on someone else's shame, taking on someone else's guilt, when it was really on their paper and theirs to deal with at the end of the day.
100%. And that manifests in dis-ease. There's something I came across a couple of years ago called CSS, Central Sensitization Syndrome. And basically diseases or illnesses like fibromyalgia, which, there's a lot of thoughts in terms of what fibromyalgia is and isn't, but you can look at different texts and scientific facts in terms of how, when we don't express, that manifests in an illness in our body. And central sensitization syndrome has to do with the body basically shutting down and manifesting into fibromyalgia, even narcissistic type behavior, mania, all these sorts of things. And it's just our body being hey, look at me, try and get the attention here, right? And that's why I do nervous system work. So I love all this. In terms of general, see the R's, you and I connect on it, speech therapy when we were in elementary school, right? Generational reconciliation. That is a mouthful, at least for me, but generational reconciliation. All right, so I get that you work with a lot of people that are kind of on the sunset years of their career.
Sure.
And I remember, I'm just going to frame this up for a moment here. It's interesting that you were the millennial person, because growing up, I think we're about the same age. I'm 37. When I entered the business world, my parents had an office supply company, and I would go to office supply conferences from a little kid all the way to working in their company at a certain point. And I remember there being so many conferences that are just about how do we speak to Gen Z? How do we speak to, now I forget, we're millennials. That's not Gen Z. That's different, right?
Yeah, Gen Z is younger than us.
Yeah. Millennials, yeah. That's right. I'm not really in that world, but it's interesting now, because now us as millennials, where we are, and then looking at Gen Z, and then the generation above us, I think that's the boomers, right?
Xers, yeah.
Xers, that's right. And our parents are boomers, that's right. So anyways, what are your thoughts on kind of bridging these gaps? Because we're really the ones that are in the driver's seat right now as millennials. Pause. You're holding your breath again, aren't you? Most high performers don't need more doing. They need a nervous system reset. I'm Sam Kabert, and I'm a keynote speaker and nervous system coach, helping people just like yourself to reset from burnout and return to clarity. I work with organizations and audiences ready to move beyond burnout and into embodying clarity. My keynotes blend storytelling, subconscious reprogramming, and live breathwork experiences that get people out of their heads and back into their lives. If you're planning a conference, retreat, or leadership event and want something that doesn't just inspire, but actually transforms, head to the link in the show notes. Let's make your next event unforgettable.
Yeah, I mean, to be a millennial right now is to be living in two different worlds, in that we have been criticized from a very young age of being different. And now we're in leadership and we're struggling with how different do we want to be. we have come to the marketplace, the workplace with core values that we want to make the world better. We care about the triple bottom line. We want to make sure that things are actually done well and done for the right reasons. And we're also too struggling with the fact that like business is business and life is life. And so it's really interesting seeing how millennials are coming into leadership. I wrote a book actually called The Millennial Entrepreneur about my own journey of coming into leadership, because I recognize that millennials were starting businesses for very different reasons than people had in the past. And so a lot of it was time freedom and economic freedom, but more than anything, I did about a 2-year-long study where I interviewed millennial entrepreneurs who were different phases of starting businesses. And it was oftentimes creating opportunity for other people, and it was introducing into the world an idea that hadn't been delivered before. So it's very interesting to see why millennials are starting businesses. But no matter what, whether you're millennial, Gen Z, X, whatever, there's something that happens where we either replicate or rebel how we were raised. And so millennials, who are by and large raised by baby boomers, are rebelling against that. We're rebelling against the big house, the boat, and the 4 different vacation homes. And we're saying we'd rather rent than buy. We'd rather connect than be entertained. And we want to make sure that what we're doing in life actually matters. We don't want to wait till we retire to actually live. So we're just seeing the priorities change so much because of millennials. We're seeing Gen X, who's the generation right after, or I should say right before us. They rebelled against their parents because they were known as the latchkey generation, that they came home with a key around their neck, let themselves in, got their bagel bites, watched MTV, and that was it. So they're rebelling against how they were raised, and they're really going family first. It's changing the real estate market. It's changing the work from home space, where Gen X is really presently parenting because they were not presently parented. So it's very interesting to see how the next generation, and so we've got Gen Z and then now Gen Alpha, this next generation, and what is it about our generation are they going to replicate? And what about our generation are they going to rebel? And I'm not just talking about like, genes and social media trends. It's what are foundational things that you and I have decided to come into agreement with it. That's kind of the theme, the banner of being a millennial. What about who we are and what we believe and how we act? Or are they going to say, that didn't work for them, I want to try something different? We're already seeing it with education, where we're now seeing Gen Z and Alpha are not wanting to go to school like we did, because our generation was like, if you don't go to school, you're not getting a job. And they're like, good, we don't want jobs, and it didn't work for them. What about me? So it's a really fascinating generational cycle. A really good book is called The Fourth Turning. And so that book really talks about what generational things can you start to predict. And so if you're interested in generational cycles and how, if you're in a kind of a multi-generational family, to see how people kind of fit together, because I think the context of relationship is, that's what I mean for generational reconciliation, is how can we bring people together and create that curiosity and be more curious than critical, and say, hey, you're different, but I can still learn from you. And I think that's such a core foundation to create a lot of forgiveness and to create a lot of connection, where I think that's one of the most beautiful things that we can do as a society, is to mend the broken hearts of what's come before us.
Yeah, I agree. We need to learn how to seek to understand, so often because of the news, the media, the programming, the conditioning of society, keeping us in fear states and limited states, and I'm right, you're wrong, right? And there's a whole movement of people like you and I, your community, my community, that are like, no, we're done with this. It's not black and white. It's not left and right and all this different stuff. And just learning to understand, be with someone to really feel, see, and hear them, and just hold space more than anything. So quick question, Gen Alpha, I didn't even know that was what they were called, but good to know. Are they in the workforce yet? Probably not, right?
They're not, no. Yeah, they're under the age of 10.
Okay, that's what I figured. I'm going to have to do some research there, because that's the age of my little ones, I should say.
Yeah, so fun. But I'll say this too. I mean, I went from being in the industry. So I was in the political space. I was a political consultant for a very long time. I worked on political campaigns for a while. I was a talking head on all the news networks. And what's so crazy is when my whole job, like that was my dream. I just was like, I just want to get on the news and have opinions about things going on in the news. And I saw how divisive it was. I saw how hard it was for people to be in relationship with me and I to be in relationship with them because of these constructed beliefs that we had said, this is what's going to divide us. And so we left. Brian and I, we fired our publicist, we walked away, we moved away, and we said there's got to be something so much more. And so that's why we focused our time and energy on helping people find purpose. But from someone who was in the news and political space to not watching the news in over 5 years, it's so interesting to see the absurdity of those who let their opinions about others be influenced by what's going on in the news media, which is all, constructed and designed to divide us anyway. And so again, it just comes back to just the importance of being able to find that connection and that curiosity between human relationships.
Yeah, that's going to be a 2.0 if you're down, or maybe Brian solo.
I love it.
Yeah, that's a fun topic. And I remember telling my dad, because my parents are like so entrenched in the news and all that right now. It's hard to reach people sometimes, right? Especially those closest to you. I was telling my dad about the classic cartoon image of the person that looks like he's stabbing someone, but then when you zoom out, it's actually like a knife on his foot where it's self-defense, but then the media is showing it as the person stabbing the other. You know what I'm talking about? I'll find it and send it to you, but it's a classic image that's probably like, I don't know, I want to say from the 1930s or something. Like, it looks old, put it that way. But the whole point is like, that's the media. They're twisting it, right? You see that one person is stabbing another, but when you zoom out and see the whole thing, wait a second, it's actually self-defense in this scenario. So as we begin to close this out, just for some inspiration, as we're talking about like different generations and our generation of millennials and even the Z and the Alpha that will come eventually, and people wanting to do things differently. The coaching space is so saturated, and a lot of people feel very skeptical in terms of this coaching space. What is your view for a dose of inspiration here as we close this out?
Yeah, well, I think you should be skeptical. I think that people who want to get paid to help people need to be able to say, yes, this is how I've helped myself, and what's the proof of doing it? I think we're living in a trust deficit because there's been many people with good hearts, but with poor execution, who have sold people on things that never really happened. And so now we have a new age of buyer who is saying, prove it to me. So we're now in the show me economy, that people want to experience it before they participate in it. And so for people who are coaches, consultants who want to get into the personal development space, listen, I knew I wanted to do this from a young age. I saw Tony Robbins. I was like, someone gets paid to do that. I listened to Jim Rohn. I was like, that's what I want to do. I knew I wanted to write books and I wanted to speak from a really young age. So I knew this is the world I wanted to jump into. But I also too knew that who are the people who are doing it well? How can I learn and pattern after their process? And how can I make sure that I can add something truly tangible and of value? Because motivation is useless. The idea of being motivated and being more excited and having more conviction is useless unless you know what it's worth, unless you know what it is that you're actually doing it for, unless you have it tied to a tangible goal. And so the role of a coach, a mentor, someone who's going to give guidance, your job is to make the intangible tangible, to talk about what's the cost of an action, to talk about what will happen if we do this perfectly, if we execute it 100%, what if we only execute it 20%? Is it still going to be worth it? And so being able to tie the intangible of motivation of I can, I should, I will, to what happens if I don't do something. I think vision boards are crap. I think people a lot of times focus a lot on what could I do, and we actually fool ourselves into thinking that we've accomplished something just by doing the practice of looking and thinking and dreaming about it. I think what's actually more helpful is to talk about what is the cost of not doing something. And so instead of a vision board, do we need more of a lack of vision board of what will happen if we don't? Because we're motivated by the carrot and the stick. And so what is going to push us more? Is it the carrot of the dream that you've desired for such a long time, or the stick of the consequence of not moving forward on that? There's a reason why people will change the most in their entire life when they're most amount of pain. After a relationship fails, after a disease comes, or after a layoff happens, after a company creates a bankruptcy. We create the most amount of change in our life when we have the most And so how can we not wait for those moments to happen? I never wish anything like that on anyone. How can we create a traumatic event in our head to say, what will happen if I don't? And that's what I believe is actually the secret to motivation, is not the willing and not the wishing, but to get really clear with yourself of what will happen if I don't, who will not be served, what books will not be written, what ideas will not be explored, what is the cost of an action for you, for your family, for the people that you're called to. That, I believe, is the ultimate push of motivation that we need right now.
Yeah, I really appreciate that message, because with this podcast, I imagine a lot of people listening are going to hear vision board, like that's crap, like, and almost taking offense. Like I even feel that coming up in me, right? But as I sit and process that pretty immediately, by the way, one of the things that comes up is, where people go wrong with manifestation is they forget about the feeling part. To your point, they do wishing and waiting, and whatever circle, community it is, whether it's outside of spirituality, but right now relating it to spiritual and mindful communities, a lot of people are sold this vision of like, oh, make your vision board, manifest it, and just let go. You have to just let it go, right? And it's so much more than just letting the vision board let go. And I can speak to personal experience, because I went through a very interesting phase about 2 years ago, where a few months went by, and this is 4 years after I left a 7-figure business that I owned while working less than 4 hours a day. And a few months went by at this point where I made less than a couple grand in a few months. And I was really starting to panic, because I was in this place of like, what's next? How am I doing this career transition? And I started to play with manifestation a little bit more. And I said to myself, everything that I'm doing isn't working. And I do believe in manifestation, spirituality. What if I just go to the beach and just do my breath work and meditate? And I started to up level to this next sense of actually feeling what I was creating, and these weird synchronicities that occurred. And within like 4 weeks, I brought in $27,000 in straight up mysterious and miraculous ways. And this is why obviously I love my message of soul life balance, or the soul life mindset, because it's grounded in this human experience while also staying connected. So I think there's a lot to what you just said that people need to hear, because it's so easy for us in the spiritual circle to just spiritually bypass and go to that wish and waiting,
Yeah. And I have my vision board literally on my phone. It's not that I don't. I pay attention to these things, but what pushes me is when I look at these things, when I have the list of things and the visuals of what I want, I won't just say, I'm so excited to do these things, to accomplish these things. I also too will rehearse the pain of inaction, of what will that look like at the end of my life if I didn't push through the uncomfortable and do what it is that I'm called to do. Both of those emotions, the pleasure and the pain, putting them side by side, I believe is the gas pedal on your purpose. That's the thing that's going to make you push through.
That makes so much sense, and I've heard you say that. I resonate. Well, the biggest gift that you and your partner Brian have given to me personally is conviction. That wasn't a word even on my radar, but y'all's definition of conviction, that what you're doing is right and worth it, has helped me be so anchored in what I'm doing, and I hope it can help many others, those of you listening as well.
Yeah, well, that is our heart's message, is to give people tools and understanding. I think in the personal development space, there's a lot of people giving mirrors, and a mirror is going to tell you more about yourself, and it's going to help you see the good, the bad, and the ugly. But we want to give you not just a mirror, but a toolbox of, now that you know something about yourself, what can you do with it? And the doing is the work. That's when we're showing up. That's when we're processing through. And whether it's one step forward, 2 steps back, it's still being in momentum and still being in motion. I know that's a big part of your message, is you're inspiring people to take action and not just to sit there and wait and wonder, but to actually move forward one step at a time.
100%, Gab. Love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the pod. Everyone, if you want to go deeper, I'm sure you do, with Gab, you can go to the show notes. You can connect with her on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn, and also the purpose assessment quiz as well.
Yeah, absolutely. They can check it out at purposetest.com. Just go to purposetest.com, have about 20 minutes to set aside to answer these questions, and then you'll get a 49-page report that helps you identify what most fulfills you, what most frustrates you, what's your purpose factor, and what can you actually do with it. So just go to purposetest.com.
It's good stuff. I'm the truth teller, and I'm sure I got some builder in me as well. So thanks again, Gab. Appreciate you coming on the show, and we'll talk again real soon. Thank you so much for listening to the very end. I hope you enjoyed this episode just as much as I enjoyed chatting with Gab. So much goodness here. And if you want to go deeper with Gab or even take the purpose assessment quiz, the best way to do so is just to go to the show notes. All the links are right there. And if you want to go deeper with me and really start to address your limiting beliefs or emotional blocks or anything like that at all, or just learn how to regulate your nervous system with breath work, the easiest way to do so is to join the free Breath Club. You can find the link in the show notes to join the Breath Club today. And I will see you on the next episode of The Soul Seeker. Thank you so much for listening to the very end. I hope you dug this podcast just as much as I enjoyed it. If you got anything at all, please, if you could just do me a favor and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast. It helps the show grow. So thank you for considering to leave a review. If you want to go deeper with Soltara or Elan, you can find the links to connect with them in the show notes. And if you want to work with me, the best way to work with me, the easiest way to work with me is the free way, and that's by joining the Breath Club. The link to the Breath Club is in the show notes. And also know that I'm available for one-on-one support, that is coaching and guidance, as well as keynotes and breathwork journeys for conferences and events. Thank you so much, and I will see you on the next episode of The Soul Seeker.